Hello there and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another chapter of In Search of the Miraculous. Chapter 14 promises to be a very interesting, amongst one of the most interesting, I would say, because Gurdjieff begins by talking about the difference between objective and subjective knowledge, how certain knowledge is difficult, if not impossible, to convey through words and the spoken language. And then he goes on to give a general sort of description of some of the symbols, some of the world symbols and symbols of history and phrases also. But then he goes on finally to the specific symbol, which is the enneagram, which I believe Gurdjieff popularized, and many New Age philosophies and movements have sort of borrowed that, adopted it, but I believe it comes from Gurdjieff first of all. And hello there, David Weber and Lawson. Welcome, guys. It's always lovely to see people here to study In Search of the Miraculous with us. We're nearing the end now. There's 18 chapters, and of course this is chapter 14, and so we're very near the end. But I'll share with you the contents of what's coming up, and then we'll get right into the text. So, the difficulty of conveying objective truths in ordinary language, objective and subjective knowledge, unity and diversity, transmission of objective knowledge, the higher centers, myths and symbols, verbal formulas, as above so below, and know thyself, duality, transformation of duality into trinity, the line of will, quaternity, quinternity, the construction of the pentagram, the five centrals, the seal of Solomon, the symbolism of numbers, geometrical figures, letters and words, further symbologies, right and wrong understanding of symbols, right and wrong understanding of symbols, levels of development, the union of knowledge and being, great doing. No one can give a man what he did not possess before. Attainment only through one's own efforts, different known lines using symbology. This system and its place, one of the principal symbols of this teaching being the enneagram, the law of seven, and its union within the law of three, examination of the enneagram, what a man cannot put into the enneagram he does not understand, a symbol in motion, experiencing the enneagram by movement, exercises, universal language, objective and subjective art, music, objective music is based on inner octaves, mechanical humanity can have subjective art only, different levels of a man's being. And so this is what is contained in chapter 14 of In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. And now let's get into the text. There were certain points to which G invariably used to return in all his talks with us after the formal lectures to which outside people were admitted were over. The first was the question of self-remembering and the necessity of constant work on oneself in order to attain this, and the second was the question of the imperfection of our language and of the difficulty of conveying objective truths in our words. As I have already mentioned before, G used the expression objective and subjective in a special sense, taking as a basis the divisions of subjective and objective states of consciousness. All our ordinary knowledge, which is based on ordinary methods of observation and verification of observations, all scientific theories deduced from the observation of facts accessible to us in subjective states of consciousness, he called subjective. Knowledge based upon ancient methods and principles of observation, knowledge of things in themselves, knowledge accompanying an objective state of consciousness, knowledge of the all, was for him objective knowledge. I will try to convey what followed as far as I remember it, making use partly of notes made by some of G's Moscow pupils and partly of notes of my own on the Petersburg talks. One of the most central of the ideas of objective knowledge, said G, is the idea of the unity of everything, of unity in diversity. From ancient times, people who have understood the content and the meaning of this idea and have seen in it the basis of objective knowledge have endeavoured to find a way of transmitting this idea in a form comprehensible to others. The successive transmission of the ideas of objective knowledge has always been a part of the task of those possessing this knowledge. In such cases, the idea of the unity of everything as the fundamental and central idea of this knowledge had to be transmitted first, and transmitted with adequate completeness and exactitude. And to do this, the idea had to be put into such forms as would ensure its proper perception by others and avoid in its transmission the possibility of distortion and corruption. For this purpose, the people to whom the idea was being transmitted were required to undergo a proper preparation, and the idea itself was put either into a logical form, as for instance in philosophical systems which endeavoured to give a definition of the fundamental principle, or arche, I believe that is in Greek, from which everything else was derived, or into religious teachings which endeavoured to create an element of faith and to evoke a wave of emotion carrying people up to the level of objective consciousness. The attempts of both the one and the other, sometimes more, sometimes less successful, run through the whole history of mankind, from the most ancient times up to our own time, and they have taken the form of religious and philosophical creeds, which have remained like monuments on the paths of these attempts to unite the thought of mankind and esoteric thought. But objective knowledge, the idea of unity included, belongs to objective consciousness. The forms which express this knowledge when perceived by subjective consciousness are inevitably distorted, and, instead of truth, they create more and more delusions. With objective consciousness, it is possible to see and feel the unity of everything. But for subjective consciousness, the world is split up into millions of separate and unconnected phenomena. Attempts to connect these phenomena into some sort of system in a scientific or a philosophical way lead to nothing, because man cannot reconstruct the idea of the whole starting from separate facts, and they cannot divine the principles of the division of the whole without knowing the laws upon which this division is based. Nonetheless, the idea of the unity of everything exists also in intellectual thought, but in its exact relation to diversity, it can never be clearly expressed in words or in logical forms. There remains always the insurmountable difficulty of language. A language which has been constructive through expressing impressions of plurality and diversity in subjective states of consciousness can never transmit with sufficient completeness and clarity the idea of unity which is intelligible and obvious for the objective state of consciousness. Realizing the imperfection and weakness of ordinary language, the people who have possessed objective knowledge have tried to express the idea of unity in myths, in symbols, and in particular verbal formulas which, having been transmitted without alteration, have carried on the idea from one school to another, often from one epoch to another. It has already been said that the higher psychic centers work in man's higher state of consciousness, the higher emotional and the higher mental. The aim of myths and symbols was to reach man's higher centers, to transmit to him ideas inaccessible to the intellect, and to transmit them in such forms as would exclude the possibility of false interpretations. Myths were destined for the higher emotional center, symbols for the higher thinking center. By virtue of this, all attempts to understand or explain myths and symbols with the mind, or the formulas and the expressions which give a summary of their content, are doomed beforehand to failure. It is always possible to understand anything, but only with the appropriate center. But the preparation for receiving ideas belonging to objective knowledge has to proceed by way of the mind, for only a mind properly prepared can transmit these ideas to the higher centers without introducing elements foreign to them. The symbols that were used to transmit ideas belonging to objective knowledge included diagrams of the fundamental laws of the universe, and they not only transmitted the knowledge itself, but showed also the way to it. The study of symbols, their construction and meaning, formed a very important part of the preparation for receiving objective knowledge, and it was in itself a test, because a literal or formal understanding of symbols at once made it impossible to receive any further knowledge. Symbols were divided into the fundamental and the subordinate. The first included the principles of separate domains of knowledge, the second expressed the essential nature of phenomena in their relation to unity. Among the formulas giving a summary of the content of many symbols, there was one which had a particular significance, namely the formula "as above, so below" from the emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus. And you can find these words and the text of Hermes Trismegistus in the Corpus Hermetica, or just the Hermetica. And I have a couple of editions of this, and yeah, it's very interesting scripture. This formula stated that all the laws of the cosmos could be found in the atom or in any other phenomena which exists as something completed according to certain laws. This same meaning was contained in the analogy drawn between the microcosm, man, and the macrocosm, the universe. The fundamental laws of triads and octaves penetrate everything and should be studied simultaneously both in the world and in man. But in relation to himself, man is nearer and more accessible, and a more accessible object of study and knowledge than the world of phenomena outside him. Therefore, in striving towards a knowledge of the universe, man should begin with the study of himself and with the realization of the fundamental laws within him. From this point of view, another formula, "Know thyself," is full of particularly deep meaning and is one of the symbols leading to the knowledge of truth. Again, we've read and studied Plato's Republic here at Book Club, and over at my other channel, Lewis Kirk, there is all of the Platonic dialogues. So if you want to go and know yourself and remove your ignorance, I highly recommend reading all of Plato's stuff and experiencing what it does to the mind and to thinking and to knowing oneself. The study of the world and the study of man will assist one another. In studying the world and its laws, a man studies himself, and in studying himself, he studies the world. In this sense, every symbol teaches us something about ourselves. The understanding of symbols can be approached in the following way. In studying the world of phenomena, a man first of all sees in everything the manifestation of two principles, one opposed to the other, which, in conjunction or in opposition, give one result or another. That is, reflect the essential nature of the principles which have created them. This manifestation of the great laws of duality and trinity man sees simultaneously in the cosmos and in himself. But in relation to the cosmos, he is merely a spectator, and moreover one who sees are only the surface phenomena, which are moving in various directions, though seeming to him to move in one direction. But in relation to himself, his understanding of the laws of duality and trinity can express itself in a practical form. Namely, having understood these laws in himself, he can, so to speak, confine the manifestation of the laws of duality and trinity to the permanent line of struggle with himself on the way to self-knowledge. In this way, he will introduce the line of will, first into the circle of time, and afterwards into the cycle of eternity, the accomplishing of which will create in him the great symbol known by the name of the Seal of Solomon. The transmission of the meaning of symbols to a man who has not reached an understanding of them in himself is impossible. This sounds like a paradox, but the meaning of a symbol and the disclosure of its essence can only be given to and can only be understood by one who, so to speak, already knows what is comprised in this symbol, and then a symbol becomes for him a synthesis of his knowledge and serves him for the expression and transmission of his knowledge, just as it served the man who constructed it. The more simple symbols, and so before this, if you look into, I think it's Euclid's geometrical philosophy, which I don't know much about, but I do know you'd start with the point and then the line. But this is something different. So I think the two lines there, the two parallel lines represents 2, the triangle represents 3, the square represents 4, the star represents 5, and then I think that's the Seal of Solomon represents 6, as far as I'm aware. Oh, there we go. Or the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which express them, possesses a definite meaning in relation to the inner development of man. They show different stages on the path of man's self-perfection and of the growth of his being. Man, in the normal state natural to him, is taken as a duality. He consists entirely of dualities or pairs of opposites. All man's sensations, impressions, feelings, thoughts are divided into positive and negative, useful and harmful, necessary and unnecessary, good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant. The work of centers proceeds under the sign of this division. Thoughts oppose feelings. Moving impulses oppose instinctive craving for quiet. This is the duality in which proceed all the perceptions, all the reactions, the whole life of man. Any man who observes himself, however little, can see this duality in himself. And anyone who's tried self-observation or self-remembering for even a moment will have seen that in themselves. But this duality would seem to alternate. What is victor today is the vanquished tomorrow. What guides us today becomes secondary and subordinate tomorrow. And everything is equally mechanical, equally independent of will, and leads equally to no aim of any kind. The understanding of duality in oneself begins with the realization of mechanicalness and the realization of the difference between what is mechanical and what is conscious. This understanding must be preceded by the destruction of the self-deceit in which a man lives who considers even his most mechanical actions to be volitional and conscious and himself to be single and whole. When self-deceit is destroyed and a man begins to see the difference between the mechanical and the conscious in himself, there begins a struggle for the realization of consciousness in life and for the subordination of the mechanical to the conscious. For this purpose, a man begins with endeavours to set a definite decision, coming from conscious motives, against mechanical processes proceeding according to the laws of duality. The creation of a permanent third principle is for man the transformation of the duality into the trinity. Strengthening this decision and bringing it constantly and infallibly into those events where formerly accidental neutralizing shocks used to act and give accidental results, gives a permanent line of results in time and is the transformation of trinity into quaternity. The next stage, the transformation of quaternity into quinternity and the construction of the pentagram, has not one but many different meanings, even in relation to man. And of these is learned first of all one, which is the most beyond doubt, relating to the work of centers. The development of the human machine and the enrichment of being begins with a new and unaccustomed functioning of this machine. We know that a man has 5 centers: the thinking, the emotional, the moving, and the instinctive, and the sex. The predominant development of any one center at the expense of the others produces an extremely one-sided type of man, incapable of further development. But if a man brings the work of the 5 centers within him into harmonious accord, he then locks the pentagram within him and becomes a finished type of the physically perfect man. The full and proper functioning of 5 centers brings them into union with the higher centers, which introduce the missing principle and put man into direct and permanent connection with objective consciousness and objective knowledge. And if you think back to chapters 1 and 2, where Gurdjieff speaks about the 3 ways and the 4th way and how the different ways relate to the different centers, the fakir is the moving center, the yogi is the intellectual center, and the monk is the emotional center. And now here Gurdjieff is again referencing the 4th way, the combination of the 3 ways into the 4th way. And now he's talking about bringing the 5 centers into one whole in order to create the pentagram within oneself. And so, of course, without knowing the references in the early chapters about the centers, and there's passages about centers laid throughout the book, without understanding all of those, it's difficult to sort of just come to chapter 14 and read that paragraph and understand what Mr. Gurdjieff is talking about. And then man becomes the six-pointed star, that is, by becoming locked within a circle of life independent and complete in itself, he becomes isolated from foreign influences or accidental shocks. He embodies in himself the seal of Solomon. And hello there, Nikos. Welcome. And just a brief comment on that bit there about becoming a six-pointed star. Like, for me anyway, I think it's a limiting belief that I still have, or that I still sort of hold on to and express. It says here, by becoming locked within a circle of life, independent and complete in itself, he becomes isolated from foreign influences or accidental shocks. And for me, it makes me, or takes my mind to either being in a monastery or in an ashram or in some retreat center somewhere, or even if you've read Carl Jung's autobiography, he has his Bollingham, where it's like a tower where no one else comes and he goes to be alone. And I mentioned that I often share on the community tab these lovely book havens, these cabins in the woods and the forest and by the beach, and it's an assumption that it's easier to, become isolated from foreign influences or accidental shocks in that place of seclusion. But Gurdjieff would say that you have to embrace this within your current life. It's not about running away like the yogi or the monk into the Himalayas or the monastery. You have to try and achieve these things in your very life where you find yourself. But that was a brief commentary, and now back to the text. In the present instance, the series of symbols given, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, is interpreted as applicable to one process. But even this interpretation is incomplete, because a symbol can never be fully interpreted. It can only be experienced in the same way, for instance, as the idea of self-knowledge must be experienced. This same process of the harmonious development of man can be examined from the point of view of the law of octaves. The law of octaves gives another system of symbols. In the sense of the law of octaves, every completed process is a transition of the note do through a series of successive tones to the do of the next octave. The 7 fundamental tones of the octave express the law of 7. The addition to it of the do of the next octave, that is to say, the crowning of the process, gives the 8th step. The 7 fundamental tones, together with the 2 intervals and additional shocks, give 9 steps. By incorporating in it the do of the next octave, we have 10 steps. The last, the 10th step, is the end of the preceding and the beginning of the next cycle. In this way, the law of octaves and the process of development it expresses includes the numbers 1 to 10. At this point, we come to what may be termed the symbolism of numbers. The symbolism of numbers cannot be understood without the law of octaves or without a clear conception of how octaves are expressed in the decimal system, and vice versa. And I think I have a book upstairs and some lectures about this, the symbolism of numbers. And I think the book I've got is called The Theology of Arithmetic, I think. And he talks about, the monad, the duad, the triad, similar to what Gurdjieff's talking about, but it's, again, a different system. But I'm sure it could help one to understand this paragraph and this chapter. If you were to read that book, it would help, no doubt. In Western systems of occultism, there is a method known by the name of theosophical addition, that is, the definition of numbers consisting of 2 or more digits by the sum of those digits. To people who do not understand the symbolism of numbers, this method of synthesizing numbers seems to be absolutely arbitrary and to lead nowhere. But for a man who understands the unity of everything existing and who has the key to this unity, the method of theosophical addition has a profound meaning, for it resolves all diversity into the fundamental laws which govern it and which are expressed in the numbers 1 to 10. As was mentioned earlier, in symbology, as represented, numbers are connected with definite geometrical figures and are mutually complementary to one another. In the Kabbalah, a symbology of letters is also used, and in combination with the symbology of letters, a symbology of words. A combination of the four methods of symbolism by numbers, geometrical figures, letters, and words gives a complicated but more perfect method. And supposedly the Torah, the Old Testament in its original Hebrew form, in ancient Hebrew, as far as I'm aware, the words also have a numerological meaning as well. So although you're reading these beautiful stories, the words represent numbers and the letters represent numbers, and so within the text there's sort of a secret numerological meaning as well, for anyone who's interested enough to get into that. Then there exists also a symbology of magic, a symbology of alchemy, and a symbology of astrology, as well as the system of the symbol of the tarot, which unites them into one whole. Very interesting paragraph there, because I've got all of Ouspensky's meditations on the tarot and the tarot cards. You'll have to go way back because that's among the first things that I shared on the channel. But Ouspensky has a book, The Symbolism of the Tarot, I believe it's called, and I read the introduction and then worked through all of the major arcana. So if you're interested in the tarot, it's a fantastic system and you must go and watch those videos. Each one of these systems can serve as a means for transmitting the idea of unity, but in the hands of the incompetent and the ignorant, however full of good intentions, the same symbol becomes an instrument of delusion. The reason for this consists in the fact that a symbol can never be taken in a final and definite meaning. In expressing the laws of the unity of endless diversity, a symbol itself possesses an endless number of aspects from which it can be examined, and it demands from a man approaching it the ability to see it simultaneously from different points of view. The symbols which are transposed into the words of ordinary language become rigid in them. They grow dim and very easily become their own opposites, confining the meaning within narrow dogmatic frames, without giving it even the very relative freedom of a logical examination of a subject. The cause of this is the literal understanding of symbols in attributing to a symbol a single meaning. The truth is again veiled by an outer covering of lies, and to discover it requires immense efforts of negation in which the idea of the symbol itself is lost. It is well known what delusions have arisen from the symbol of religion, of alchemy, and particularly of magic, in those who have taken them literally and only in one meaning. At the same time, the right understanding of symbols cannot lead to dispute. It deepens knowledge, and it cannot remain theoretical because it intensifies the striving towards real results, towards the union of knowledge and being, that is, to great doing. Pure knowledge cannot be transmitted, but by being expressed in symbols, it is covered by them as by a veil, although at the same time, for those who desire and who know how to look, this veil becomes transparent. And in this sense, it is possible to speak of the symbolism of speech, although this symbolism is not understood by everyone. To understand the inner meaning of what is said is possible only on a certain level of development and when accompanied by the corresponding efforts and state of the listener. But on hearing things which are new for him, instead of making efforts to understand them, a man begins to dispute them or refute them, maintaining against them an opinion which he considers to be right and which, as a rule, has no relation whatever to them. In this way he loses all chance of acquiring anything new. To be able to understand speech when it becomes symbolical, it is essential to have learned before and to know already how to listen. Any attempt to understand literally, where speech deals with objective knowledge and with the union of diversity and unity, is doomed to failure beforehand and leads in most cases to further delusions. It is necessary to dwell upon this because the intellectualism of contemporary education imbues people with a propensity and a tendency to look for logical definitions and for logical arguments against everything that they hear, and, without noticing it, people unconsciously fetter themselves with their desire, as it were, for exactitude in those spheres where exact definitions, by their very nature, imply inexactitude in meaning. Therefore, because of the tendency referred to in our thinking, it often happens that exact knowledge concerning details communicated to a man before he has acquired an understanding of the essential nature of a thing makes it difficult for him to understand this essential nature. This does not mean that exact definitions do not exist on the way of true knowledge. On the contrary, only there do they exist, but they differ very greatly from what we usually think them to be. And if anyone supposes that he can go along the way of self-knowledge guided by an exact knowledge of all the details, and if he expects to have such knowledge without first having given himself the trouble to assimilate the indications he has received concerning his own work, then he should first of all understand that he will not attain knowledge until he makes the necessary efforts, and that only of himself and only by his own efforts can he attain what he seeks. No one can ever give him what he did not possess before. No one can do for him the work he should do for himself. All that another can do for him is to give him the impetus to work, and from this point of view, symbolism, properly perceived, plays the part of an impetus of this kind for our knowledge. So that's a very another interesting passage there. How we can't give people knowledge. We can just give them the impetus to find the knowledge and the impetus to awaken also. We can't awaken someone for them. They have to awaken by themselves. And it's the old analogy, is it, or metaphor. You can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. You can share Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous with someone, but you can't make them read it. We have spoken earlier of the law of octaves, of the fact that every process, no matter upon what scale it takes place, is completely determined in its gradual development by the law of the structure of the 7-tone scale. In connection with this, it has been pointed out that every note, every tone, if taken on another scale, is again a whole octave. The intervals between mi and fa and between si and do, which cannot be filled by the intensity of the energy of the process in operation, and which require an outside shock, outside help, so to speak, connect by this very fact one process with other processes. From this it follows that the law of octaves connects all processes of the universe, and, to one who knows the scales of the passage and the laws of the structure of the octave, it presents the possibility of an exact cognition of everything and every phenomena in its essential nature, and of all its interrelations with phenomena and things connected with it. For, uniting into one whole all knowledge connected with the law of the structure of the octave, there is a certain symbol which takes the form of a circle divided into 9 parts with lines connected. I'll start that paragraph again because that was a bit butchered. For, uniting into one whole all knowledge connected with the law of the structure of the octave, there is a certain symbol which takes the form of a circle divided into 9 parts with lines connecting the 9 points on the circumference in a certain order. And now we begin and come to the enneagram, and this is the introductory comments about the enneagram, so here we go. Before passing on to the study of the symbol itself, it is essential to understand certain aspects of the teaching which makes use of this symbol, as well as the relation of this teaching to other systems which make use of symbolical methods for the transmission of knowledge. In order to understand the interrelation of these teachings, it must always be remembered that the ways which lead to the cognition of unity approach it like the radii of a circle moving towards the center. The closer they come to the center, the closer they approach one another. As a result of this, the theoretical statements which form the basis of one line can sometimes be explained from the point of view of statements of another line and vice versa. For this reason, it is sometimes possible to form a certain immediate line between two adjacent lines. But in the absence of a complete knowledge and understanding of the fundamental lines, such intermediate ways may easily lead to a mixing of lines, to confusion and error. Of the principal lines, more or less known, 4 can be named. 1, the Hebraic, 2, the Egyptian, 3, the Persian, and 4, the Hindu. Moreover, of the last, we know only its philosophy, and of the first 3, parts of their theory. In addition to these, there are 2 lines known in Europe, namely Theosophy and so-called Western occultism, which have resulted from a mixture of the fundamental lines. Both lines bear in themselves grains of truth, but neither of them possess full knowledge, and therefore attempts to bring them to practical realization gives only negative results. And in our little Gurdjieff Discord group, we've been discussing occultism recently, and so here Gurdjieff shares his brief thoughts on what occultism is. The teaching whose theory is here being set out is completely self-supporting and independent of other lines, and it has been completely unknown up to the present time. Like other lines, it makes use of the symbolical method, and one of its principal symbols is the figure which has been mentioned, that is, the circle, divided into 9 parts. Hello there, Zanya Rauf, welcome, and it's nice to see you. And we just arrived at the enneagram. This is the symbol, the enneagram. The circle is divided into 9 equal parts. 6 points are connected by a figure which is symmetrical in relation to a diameter passing through the uppermost point of the divisions of the circumference. Further, the uppermost point of the division is the apex of an equilateral triangle linking together the points of the divisions which do not enter into the construction of the original complicated figure. And now Gurdjieff goes on to tell us and teach us how this is produced, how one would produce this enneagram. This symbol cannot be met with anywhere in the study of occultism, either in books or in oral transmission. It was given such significance by those who knew that they considered it necessary to keep the knowledge of it secret. Only some hints and partial representations of it can be met with in literature, and I'm going to read thus it is possible to meet with a drawing like this, and there's a footnote here, and I don't normally read the footnotes, but I'm going to read this footnote, and it starts here at the bottom. This is the footnote relating to the top. It says, in the book Études sur les origines de la nature du Zohar by Escarp, which I imagine it's about the origin of nature by the Zohar, maybe. There is a drawing of a circle divided into 9 parts, with the following description of this circle. If we multiply 9 by 9, the result is shown in the number 8 on the left side and the number 1 on the right side. In the same way, 9 times 8 gives the product shown in number 7 on the left and number 2 on the right. Exactly in the same way, 9 times 6. Beginning with 9 times 5, the order becomes reversed. That is, the number representing the units takes the left side, and the number representing the tens takes the right. And so, back to this. Only some hints and partial representations of it can be met with in literature. Thus, it is possible to meet with a drawing like this, figure 45, another like this, figure 46, the symbol which takes the form of a circle divided into 9 parts with lines connecting them together expresses the law of 7 in its union with the law of 3. The octave possesses 7 tones, and the 8th is a repetition of the first, together with the 2 additional shocks which fill the intervals mi, fa, and si, do. There are 9 elements. And this combination and combining of the law of the 3 and the law of the 7 is very important. And just like the centers and the teachings of the centers throughout the whole book, We've had the teachings of the law of the three and the law of the seven and the law of octaves throughout the whole book. In many different passages, you'll read about either the law of three and the law of seven, how they relate, how they correlate, and here in this symbol they combine. And we've got some more people coming in. Hello there, Kathy. Lovely to see you. And Chevals, bonsoir. Hi there. Kathy took an enneagram test. Whatever that means, whatever that consists of. The complete construction of this symbol, which connects it with the complete expression of the law of octaves, is more complicated than the construction shown. But even this construction shows the inner laws of one octave, and it points out a method of cognizing the essential nature of a thing examined in itself. The isolated existence of a thing or phenomena under examination is the closed circle of an eternally returning and uninterruptedly flowing process. The circle symbolizes this process. The separate points in the division of the circumference symbolize the steps of the process. The symbol as a whole is Do, that is, something with an orderly and complete existence. It is a circle, a completed circle. It is the zero of our decimal system. In its inscription, it represents a closed cycle. It contains within itself everything necessary for its own existence. It is isolated from its surroundings. The succession of stages in the process must be connected with the succession of the remaining numbers from 1 to 9. The presence of the ninth step filling up the interval C-Do completes the cycle, that is, it closes the circle, which begins anew at this point. The apex of the triangle closes the duality of its base, making possible the manifold forms of its manifestation in the most diverse triangles, in the same way as the point of the apex of the triangle multiplies itself infinitely in the line of its base. Therefore, every beginning and completion of the cycle is situated in the apex of the triangle, in the point where the beginning and the end merge, where the circle is closed and which sounds in the endlessly flowing cycle as the two does in the octave. But it is the ninth step that closes and again begins a cycle. Therefore, in the upper point of the triangle corresponding to Do stands the number 9, and among the remaining points are disposed the numbers 1 to 8. And so I think now it's been some time since I've thought about and looked into the enneagram, but it's becoming clear to me now, reading it after all this time and working through slowly each chapter of In Search of the Miraculous and doing brief commentaries. There's definitely more commentaries I could do, but it's almost like this symbol that we're looking at now, the enneagram, it contains within it, of course, the law of octaves and the law of 3. And so, yeah, I mean, you can just look at that symbol and have all of the knowledge, you know, it's all contained in that symbol. And I can't say it's sort of representative to me currently, but it seems that it can be, you know, you can study, learn, read about the octaves, read this chapter again, read about the centers, work out how it's configured, how you would create this, and sort of, again, he mentions later, and there's definitely in Colin Wilson book, he talks about the enneagram at the end. Maybe I'll share that chapter if people are more interested and want to know more about the enneagram. There's other sources that talk about this enneagram from a Gurdjieffian perspective. Passing on to the examination of the complicated figure inside the circle, we should understand the laws of its construction. The laws of unity are reflected in all phenomena. The decimal system is constructed on the basis of the same laws. Taking a unit as one note containing with itself a whole octave, we must divide this unit into 7 unequal parts in order to arrive at the 7 notes of this octave. But in the graphic representation, the inequality of the parts is not taken into account, and for the construction of the diagram there is taken first a 7th part, then 2/7, then 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7, and 7/7. Calculating these parts in decimals, we get, and I'll just come back to that. Kathy says about a personality test using the enneagram, and I think, like I say, Kathy, I think Gurdjieff would have brought this symbol to the Western world, and I think perhaps it's sort of been co-opted by these personality systems and New Age people. But I believe it originates with Gurdjieff, as far as I'm aware, and it was only through Gurdjieff's teachings that it became popularized again in the West, and so that's what I'm aware of. I'm not going to read out all these figures, but I've actually done these sums, and it does come out like this. So this isn't fake news. You can do the math yourself. I'm not going to read them all out. They're there for you if you want to pause and do them and do the figures yourself. In examining the series of periodic decimals obtained, we at once see that in all except the last, the periods consist of exactly the same 6 digits which run in a definite sequence, so that knowing the first digit of the period, it is possible to reconstruct the whole period in full. So you can see here, again, maybe I will be reading them all, but it's saying that it's the same sequence, 1 4 2 8 5 7. And there you've got 2 8 5 7 1 4, 4 2 8 5, and you know, is that they're recurring apart from the end. If we now place on the circumference all the 9 numbers from 1 to 9 and connect those numbers which are included in the period by straight lines in the same sequence in which the numbers stand in the period, according to which number we start from, we shall obtain the figure found inside the circle. The numbers 3, 6, and 9 are not included in the period. They form the separate triangle, the free trinity of the symbol. Making use of theosophical addition and taking the sum of the numbers and of the period, we obtain 9, that is, a whole octave. Again, in each separate note there will be included a whole octave subject to the same laws as the first. The position of the notes will correspond to the numbers of the period of the drawing of an octave will look like this. So here we're going to learn about the creation of the symbol, and I can't obviously show both images at the same time, but if we were to have go up quickly, oh no, where is it? It's on the, no, I'm going the wrong way, sorry, there. 1 4 2 8 5 7. 1 4 2 8 5 7. So again, I'm sure Gurdjieff or Ouspensky is going to show us in a moment how it's done, but you can formulate this diagram with what Gurdjieff's talking about. The triangle 936, which unites into one whole the 3 points on the circumference not included in the period, connects together the law of 7 and the law of 3. The numbers 3, 6, 9 are not included in the period. 2 of them, 3 and 6, correspond to the 2 intervals in the octave. The third is, so to speak, superfluous, and at the same time replaces the fundamental note which does not enter the period. Moreover, any phenomenon which is able to act reciprocally with a phenomenon similar to it sounds as the note do in a corresponding octave. Therefore, do can emerge from its circle and enter into orderly correlation with any within another circle. That is, play that role in another cycle, which, in the cycle under consideration, it is played by the shocks, filling the intervals in the octave. Therefore, here also, by having this possibility, do is connected by the triangle 3, 6, 9 with those places in the octave where the shocks from outside sources occur, where the octave can be penetrated to make connection with what exists outside it. The law of 3 stands out, so to speak, from the law of 7. The triangle penetrates through the period, and these two figures in combination give the inner structure of the octave and its notes. At this point in our reasoning, it would be entirely right to raise the question, why is one of the intervals, which is designated by the number 3, found in its right place between the notes mi and fa, and the other, which is designated by the number 6, found between sol and la, when its right place is between si and do? If the conditions had been observed as to the appearance of the second interval, in its own place we should have had the following circle: do, re, mi, interval, fa, sol, la, si, interval, do. And the 9 elements of the closed cycle would have been grouped symmetrically together in the following way. So here, this is if you have, you misorder them. Do, re, mi at the top, interval, fa, sol, and then again, la, si, interval. So it's arranging them in a different form. The distribution we do get is, again, like it's showing, can only give the following grouping. Again, this is something that one would have to come back and think about more and consider, write down, reflect on and read the previous passages. That is, in one case X between mi and fa, and in the other between sol and la, where it is not necessary. The apparent placing of the interval in its wrong place itself shows to those who are able to read the symbol what kind of shock is required for the passage of si to do. In order to understand this, it is essential to recollect what was said about the role of shocks in the process proceeding in man and in the universe. When we examine the application of the law of octaves to the cosmos, then the step Sun-Earth was represented in this way. Again, you have to go back, and now we're bringing in the ray of creation. So there's so many symbols and teachings and philosophies and sort of concepts that you really need a good grasp of the whole text in order to sort of go deeper into the ideas. In relation to the 3 octaves of radiation, it was pointed out that the passage of do to si, the filling of the interval, takes place within the organism of the sun. It was pointed out in the cosmic octave in relation to the interval do si that this passage is accomplished by the will of the Absolute. The passage fa mi in the cosmic octave is accomplished mechanically with the help of a special machine, which makes it possible for fa, which enters it, to acquire by a series of inner processes the characteristics of sol standing above it, without changing its note, that is, to accumulate, as it were, the inner energy for passing independently into the next note, into mi. Exactly the same relationship is repeated in all completed processes. In examining the processes of nutrition in the human organism and the transformation of the substances taken into the organism, we find in these processes exactly the same intervals and shocks. So yeah, quite heavy going. Yes, me too, Kathy, and hello there, CMS 900. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And so it's a rather heady section here. That's, again, I speak for myself, it's difficult to understand, and it takes a lot of chewing over in order to grasp it fully, but that's up to the individual. How deep do you want your understanding to be? And that's up to you. As we pointed out before, man takes in 3 kinds of food, and now we're back to the food diagram and impressions, so chapter 14 really does tie all of these ideas and concepts together. Each one of them is the beginning of a new octave. The second octave, that is, the air octave, joins up with the first, that is, the octave of food and drink, at the point where the first octave comes to a stop in its development at the note mi. And the third octave joins up with the second at the point where the second octave comes to a stop in its development at the note mi. And this is, again, like I say, the food diagram where the octaves evolve until they require a shock. And the first shock, I believe, is self-remembering. The second shock is not expression of negative emotions, maybe, I think. But there's these 2 shocks in the food diagram in order to have the hydrogens evolve to their fullest. But that's back in another chapter. But it must be understood that, just as in many chemical processes, only definite quantities of substances exactly determined by nature give compounds of the required quality. So in the human organism, the three kinds of food must be mixed in definite proportions. The final substance in the process of the food octave is the substance C, hydrogen 12 in the third scale, which needs an additional shock in order to pass into a new dough. But as three octaves have taken part in the production of this substance, their influence is also reflected by the final result by determining its quality. The quality and quantity can be regulated by regulating the three kinds of food received by the organism only in the presence of a full and harmonious conformity between all three kinds of food. By strengthening or weakening of the different parts of the process is the required result obtained. But it is essential to remember that no arbitrary attempts to regulate food in the literal sense of the word, or breathing, can lead to the desired end unless one knows exactly what one is doing and why, and what kind of result it will give. And furthermore, even if a man were to succeed in regulating two components of the process, food and breathing, again this would not be enough, because it is still more important to know how to regulate the food of the third story, impressions. Therefore, before even thinking of influencing practically the inner processes, it is essential to understand the exact mutual relationship of the substances entering the organism, the nature of the possible shocks, and the laws governing the transition of notes. These laws are everywhere the same. In studying man, we study the cosmos. In studying the cosmos, we study man. As above, so below. The cosmic octave, absolute moon, has, according to the law of three, been broken into three subordinate octaves. In these three octaves, the cosmos is like man, the same three stories, the same three shocks. Where in the cosmic octaves of radiation the place of the interval Fermi appears in the diagram are marked the machines, which are found there in the same way as in the human body. The process of the transmission Fermi can be represented in the most schematic way thus. The cosmic fire enters this machine like the food of the lower story and begins its cycle of changes. Therefore, in the beginning it sounds in the machine as dough. The substance soul of the cosmic octave serves as the substance which enters the middle story like the air in breathing, which helps the note fa inside the machine to pass into the note mi. This soul, on entering the machine, also sounds as dough. The matter which has now been obtained is joined in the upper story by the substance of the cosmic la, which enters the upper story of the machine also as dough. And like I often say, if you're not aware of the previous passages that talk about these things, that'll be like a foreign language. But if you are aware, you can start to glimpse what Gurdjieff is alluding to or pointing to. And this is where he says at the beginning, objective knowledge is difficult to transmit through words. Ouspensky is trying his best, and so is Gurdjieff speaking, but to gain it fully, you have the symbols, which is what this chapter is about. As we see from this, the following notes, la, sol, fa, serve as food for the machine. In the order of their succession, according to the law of three, la will be the active element, sol the neutralizing, and fa the passive. The active principle reacting with the passive, that is, becoming connected with it by the help of the neutralizing principle, gives a certain definite result. This is represented symbolically thus. So there's the symbol. I'll let you look at the symbol. Plus, minus, equals, or positive, negative, and neutralizing. And then there's the diagram on the side as well. This symbol points out that the substance fa, in being mixed with the substance la, gives as a result the substance sol. And as this process succeeds in the octave, developing as it were inside the note fa, it is therefore possible to say that fa, without changing its pitch, acquires the properties of sol. All that has been said about the octaves of radiation and about the food octaves in the human organism has a direct connection with the symbol consisting of a circle dividing into 9 parts. This symbol, as the expression of a perfect synthesis, contains within itself all the elements of the laws it represents, and from it can be extracted and by its help transmitted everything that is connected with these octaves and much else besides, which is what I was mentioning earlier, that if you really fully understand and know that diagram, the symbol, the enneagram, then you can see in it, all the mysteries of the universe maybe at some point. And yes, Kathy, I would say that, the absolute equals God. And for me, it's helpful that Gurdjieff calls it the absolute, because that term for us living today, it doesn't have as much baggage. The word God, it comes with a hell of a lot of baggage. But the word absolute, it's more clinical, more secular, just like Plato's the good or the one. The absolute, it doesn't have the baggage. So yes, I consider the absolute as God. And I've read the Quran, CMS 900, and I enjoy the Quran, but I do find it very dogmatic, similar to the Old Testament. So it's not my favorite scripture, but I have read and studied it, and I do feel that there is much truth and wisdom to be gleaned there. But it's not my favorite scripture, I'll be honest. Back to the text. G returned to the enneagram many times and in various connections. Each completed whole, each cosmos, each organism, each plant is an enneagram, he said. But not each of these enneagrams has an inner triangle. The inner triangle stands for the presence of higher elements, according to the scale of hydrogens in a given organism. This inner triangle is possessed by such plants, for example, as hemp, poppy, hops, tea, coffee, tobacco, and many other plants which play a definite role in the life of man. The study of these plants can reveal much for us in regard to the enneagram. So, consume yourself some hemp and a coffee and stare at the enneagram, and it will reveal much. Speaking in general, it must be understood that the enneagram is a universal symbol. All knowledge can be included in the enneagram, and with the help of the enneagram it can be interpreted. And in this connection, only what a man is able to put into the enneagram does he actually know, that is, understand. What he cannot put into the enneagram he does not understand. For the man who is able to make use of it, the enneagram makes books and libraries entirely unnecessary. Quite a statement there. Everything can be included and read in the enneagram. A man may be quite alone in the desert, and he can trace the enneagram in the sand and in it read the eternal laws of the universe. And every time he can learn something new, something he did not know before. Again, quite the, quite the advertisement. There is a better word, but I can't think of it. Quite the advertisement for the enneagram. If two men who have been in different schools meet, they will draw the enneagram, and with its help they will be able at once to establish which of them knows more, and which, consequently, stands upon which step, that is to say, which is the elder, which is the teacher, and which the pupil. The enneagram is the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal language which has as many different meanings as there are levels of men. The enneagram is perpetual motion, the same perpetual motion that men have sought since the remotest antiquity and could never find. And it is clear why they could not find perpetual motion. They sought outside themselves that which was within them, and they attempted to construct perpetual motion as a machine is constructive, whereas real perpetual motion is a part of another perpetual motion and cannot be created apart from it. The enneagram is a schematic diagram of perpetual motion, that is, of a machine of eternal movement. But of course it is necessary to know how to read this diagram. The understanding of this symbol and the ability to make use of it give man very great power. It is perpetual motion, and it is also the philosopher's stone of the alchemist. The knowledge of the enneagram has for a very long time been preserved in secret, and if it now is, so to speak, made available to all, it is only in an incomplete and theoretical form of which nobody could make any practical use without instruction from a man who knows. In order to understand the enneagram, it must be thought of as in motion, as moving. A motionless enneagram is a dead symbol. The living symbol is in motion. Much later, it was the year 1922 when G organized his institute in France, and when his pupils were studying dances and dervish exercises, G showed them exercises connected with the movement of the enneagram. On the floor of the hall where the exercises took place, a large enneagram was drawn, and the pupils who took part in the exercises stood on the spots marked by the numbers 1 to 9. Then they began to move in the direction of the numbers of the period in a very interesting movement, turning round one another at the points of meeting, that is, at the points where the lines intersect in the enneagram. G said at that time that exercise of moving according to the enneagram would occupy an important place in his ballet The Struggle of the Magicians, and he said also that without taking part in these exercises, without occupying some kind of place in them, it was almost impossible to understand the enneagram. It is possible to experience the enneagram by movement, he said. The rhythm itself of these movements would suggest the necessary ideas and maintain the necessary tension. Without them, it is not possible to feel what is most important. There was yet another drawing of the enneagram which was made under his direction in Constantinople in the year 1920. In this drawing, inside the enneagram, were shown the 4 beasts of the apocalypse: the bull, the lion, the man, and the eagle, and with them the dove. The additional symbols were connected with centers. In connections with talks about the meaning of the enneagram as a universal symbol, G again spoke of the existence of a universal philosophical language. Men have tried for a long time to invent a universal language, he said, and in this instance, as in many others, they seek something which has long since been found, and try to think of and invent something which has been known and in existence a long time. I said before that there exists not 1 but 3 universal languages, to speak more exactly, 3 degrees. The first degree of this language already makes it possible for people to express their own thoughts and to understand the thoughts of others in relation to things concerning which ordinary language is powerless. In what relation do these languages stand to art? Someone asked, and does not art itself represent that philosophical language which others seek intellectually? I do not know of which art you speak, said G. There is art and art. You have doubtless noticed that during our lectures and talks I have often been asked various questions by those present relating to art, but I have always avoided talks on this subject. This was because I consider all ordinary talks about art as absolutely meaningless. People speak of one thing while they imply something quite different, and they have no idea whatever what they are implying. At the same time, it is quite useless to try to explain the real relationship of things to a man who does not know the ABC about himself, that is to say, about man. We have talked together now for some time, and by now you ought to know this ABC, so that I can perhaps talk to you now, even about art. You must first of all remember that there are 2 kinds of art, one quite different from the other: objective art and subjective art. All that you know, all that you call art, is subjective art, that is, something that I do not call art at all, because it is only objective art that I call art. To define what I call objective art is difficult, first of all, because you ascribe to subjective art the characteristics of objective art, and secondly, because when you happen upon objective works of art, you take them as being on the same level as subjective works of art. I will try to make my idea clear. You say an artist creates. I say this only in connection with objective art. In relation to subjective art, I say that with him it is created. You do not differentiate between these, but this is where the whole difference lies. Further, you ascribe to subjective art an invariable action, that is, you expect works of subjective art to have the same reaction on everybody. You think, for instance, that a funeral march should provoke in everyone sad and solemn thoughts, and that any dance music, a Quinternity, for instance, will provoke happy thoughts. But in actual fact, this is not so at all. Everything depends upon association. If on a day that a great misfortune happens to me, I hear some lively tune for the first time, this tune will evoke in me sad and oppressive thoughts for my whole life afterwards. And if on a day when I am particularly happy I hear a sad tune, this tune will always evoke happy thoughts, and so with everything else. And this is a very interesting thing about trauma, I suppose. It relates more to trauma, and there's a Gabor Mate speaks about trauma a lot. He's got a new book, The Myth of Normal, that you should check out if you want to work on and deal with your own trauma. But he's saying there about associations. If you associate a happy thought with a sad song, then for you, when you hear the sad song, you'll have a happy association, and vice versa. And so it is with everything, you know. If you've had a scary experience with a clown when you were a child, which many children do have, you will associate fear with clowns. Especially you've got the It movie franchise and all these things. And the same, you know, on and on. I could just keep giving examples, but what's important is what we associate with the thing rather than the thing in itself. And I think that the fourth way and Gurdjieff work is trying to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? To sort of evolve past that association and experience the objective art in itself, or the objective thing in itself. But back to the text. The difference between objective art and subjective art is that in objective art, the artist really does create. That is, he makes what he intended. He puts into his work whatever ideas and feelings he wants to put into it. And the action of this work upon men is absolutely definite. They will, of course, each according to his own level, receive the same ideas and the same feelings that the artist wanted to transmit to them. There can be nothing accidental either in the creation or in the impression of objective art. In subjective art, everything is accidental. The artist, as I have already said, does not create. With him, it creates itself. This means that he is in the power of ideas, thoughts, and moods, which he himself does not understand and over which he has no control whatever. They rule him and they express themselves in one form or another. And when they have accidentally taken this or that form, this form just as accidentally produces on man this or that action according to his mood, tastes, habits, the nature of the hypnosis under which he lives, and so on. There is nothing invariable, nothing is definite here. In objective art, there is nothing indefinite. Would not art disappear in being definite? Would not art disappear in being definite in this way, asked one of us? And is not a certain indefiniteness, elusiveness, exactly what distinguishes art from, let us say, science? If this indefiniteness is taken away, if you take away the fact that the artist himself does not know what he will obtain or what impression his work will produce on people, it will then be a book and not art. I do not know what you are talking about, said G. We have different standards. I measure the merit of art by its consciousness, and you measure it by its unconsciousness. We cannot understand one another. A work of objective art ought to be a book, as you call it. The only difference is that the artist transmits his ideas not directly through words or signs or hieroglyphs, but through certain feelings which he excites consciously and in an orderly way, knowing what he is doing and why he does it. Legends, said one of those present, have been preserved of statues of gods in ancient Greek temples. For example, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which produced upon everyone a definite and always identical impression. Quite true, said G. And even the fact that such stories exist shows that people understood that the difference between real and unreal art lay precisely in this, an invariable or else an accidental action. Can you not indicate other works of objective art? Is there anything that it is possible to call objective in contemporary art? When was the last objective work of art created? Nearly everyone present began to put these and similar questions to G. Before speaking of this, said G, principles must be understood. If you grasp the principles, you will be able to answer these questions yourselves. But if you do not grasp them, nothing that I may say will explain anything to you. It was exactly about this that it was said, they will see with their eyes and will not perceive. They will hear with their ears and they will not understand. And I believe that's a quote from Jesus there. I will cite you only one example. Music. Objective music is all based on inner octaves, and it can obtain not only definite psychological results, but definite physical results. There can be such music as would freeze water. There can be such music as would kill a man instantaneously. The biblical legend of the destruction of the walls of Jericho by music is precisely a legend of objective music. Plain music, no matter of what kind, will not destroy walls, but objective music indeed can do so. And not only can it destroy, but it can also build up. In the legend of Orpheus, there are hints of objective music, for Orpheus used to impart knowledge by music. Snake charmers' music in the East is an approach to objective music, of course, very primitive. Very often it is simply one note, which is long drawn out, rising and falling only very little. But in this single note, inner octaves are going on all the time, and melodies of inner octaves which are inaudible to the ears but felt by the emotional center. And the snake hears this music, or, more strictly speaking, he feels it and he obeys it. The same music, only a little more complicated, and men would obey it. So you see that art is not merely a language, but something much bigger. And if you connect what I have just said with what I said earlier about the different levels of man's being, you will understand what is said about art. Mechanical humanity consists of men, number 1, number 2, and number 3, and they, of course, can have subjective art only. Objective art requires at least flashes of objective consciousness. In order to understand these flashes properly and to make proper use of them, a great inner unity is necessary and a great control of oneself. And so that's chapter 14. It's lovely to see so many of you here enjoying and learning from Gurdjieff. So we have 15, 16, 17, 18, 4 chapters left. And we will finish Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. I've got a few avenues that I can take after this. I think I'm pretty settled on the one I would like to read next from the Gurdjieff canon. And so that's my plan, which I'll share with you as we move towards the end. If you've got any questions quickly before we sign off and say goodnight, I'll be happy to try and answer them. But I say it, I think, in every video that I do about Gurdjieff and every commentary video and every time we come to the difficult sections, that in a sense, without knowing the whole book or learning the whole book, and I know this can be quite overwhelming for anyone new or anyone who's not sort of frequented with all the ideas, but it's like you have to go through the whole book, all the 18 chapters, then you have to go through it again, then you can start reading the passages from each of the sections of the books, or the book to sort of, read all the passages about octaves, read all the passages about the centers, read all the passages about the ray of creation, read all the passages about self-remembering and self-observation and put them together. And then, then you can go through it all again with that knowledge. And so it really is, I think the book, I've got it here, one of my favorite book, I would say, that I own, that I've ever read, because just like we're learning there about the enneagram, for me, this book, In Search of the Miraculous, it's the same, Every time I read it, I try and read it every year, maybe more than that, this is the most in-depth study that I've done of it. No, that's not actually true. I've done many studies of it, but this is sharing it with you and going through it slowly, commenting, speaking out loud, answering questions. Let's say you read it, then you leave it a year and you read it again. It'll be a different book. You'll get more out of it, especially if you've been doing what the book tells you, self-remembering, self-awareness, trying to develop your consciousness and your being. You'll come back and you'll read it again and it'll be a different book. You'll get much more out of it because your understanding and knowledge and being has been raised. But doesn't seem to be any questions. You can always put a question in the comments at a later date and I'll be happy to answer that. But that's all for now. Like I said, I think someone asked at the top about camping. I'm going camping on Sunday. So this will be the last live for a little while, but I have some uploads for you to whet your appetite if you're going to miss me until next week. I've got a few things. I won't spoil what they are, but they're a little bit different just to test the water to see. Kathy, we have a comment. I reread each chapter a few times and then listen to commentaries you do a few times. So that's the way to do it, Kathy. That's the way to study. You have to keep going over and over and over. And I appreciate your interest and intensity and you being here, Kathy. It's lovely to have this group developing over on our Discord channel. And as we work through this, we're going to do more books. We're going to work through all the canonical Gurdjieff texts, as long as the YouTube gods allow me to keep sharing and functioning here. I'm going to go camping from Sunday to Thursday with my family. And then I'm going to go camping on Friday, Saturday, Sunday in a different place with a friend. And so I'll be spending a week in nature, trying to avoid the screen. Get back to nature, remember myself, be conscious, be aware, just be in nature. There'll be a bit of surfing there, a bit of hiking, and just a lovely time with my family and then my friend later. So I'll try and share that with you in some form. Yes, Chavals, I am planning on... We've got a question, so I was just about to leave, but we have a question. Chavals asked, planning on reading other G-related books, and I am. Thank you, Chavals. I was thinking about, and in the Gurdjieff group, and I suppose as Chavals has asked, I'm going to share. I did plan, and people in the group would have liked to hear Jin de Salzman's The Reality of Being, but that's a very technical book. So what I'm going to do instead, Chavals, is read next Gurdjieff's Meetings with Remarkable Men, because it's not so technical as in Search of the Miraculous or The Reality of Being. It's more sort of semi-autobiographical. So that's what I'm going to read next as soon as I finish this. I haven't read that for many years, and so hopefully we'll work through that very quickly, because I really want to read that myself. And so that's where we'll go next. And then possibly Reality of Being after that, or maybe some other book. But that's all for this evening, guys. So like I say, I'm off into nature. Little screen and social media detox, I hope. We all need those from time to time, but I'll be back very soon where we will continue with Jane Austen's Emma. I'll have to re-wrestle with that book. And I'm looking forward to getting back after a nice break, seeing you all again, and continue to work through all these amazing texts. So take care, guys. Thanks everyone for joining. Any questions, get them in the comments. But for now, take care. Have a lovely weekend. And I'll see you soon. Take care, guys. Bye now.